You're listening to the Values and Leadership Podcast, where business leaders share their stories of purposeful impact and success.
Hello, and welcome to the Values and Leadership Podcast, the podcast for innovative leaders who want to apply new ways of doing things in work to become more successful and have a purposeful impact on their stakeholders. I am your host, Ahmed Arif. We invite corporate leaders, advisors, and executives who believe in participative leadership and love to share their positive life and business experiences, their sense of direction, sense of meaning, and how they challenge their thinking in growing their business and the people around them to their next best stage. In this episode, we are discussing purpose, profits, stakeholders, sense of entitlement, and Alex Edmans' new concept, pie economics. Today, we have Alex Edmans. He is the professor of finance in London Business School. He is a Mercer's School Memorial Professor of Business at Gresham College. He is the academic director in Center for Corporate Governance. He is the managing editor in Review of Finance. He is the member in the Responsible Investment Advisory Committee in the Royal London Asset Management. He is a member, one of the 5 steering committee members in the Purposeful Company. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks so much, Ahmed. It's great to be here.
I like this introduction where you are participating in a lot of companies, in a lot of communities, where you seems to have a really big cause in your life that you are caring for. That's why you are working in various institutions. And you are doing a lot of podcasts, you are doing a lot of TED Talks as well. So I'm really enjoying your company now. And you are one of the valued guests that I have met in the show so far. So, and I like to call you the influencer because you have a lot of influence on a lot of people. I'm reviewing your LinkedIn posts as well. And people are really enjoying and commenting and interacting with you so much. So I really like the hard work you are doing. So thank you for accepting being with us today.
Thank you. It's really nice to be here. So what I like to do these things is to spread the message of purposeful business. And I really appreciate this opportunity to spread that message.
Great. You have a book you recently launched, you recently released this year, 2020, and where you mentioned a topic which is nice, pie economics. And I think this has to do with your journey in life. I realized that you got a major A in economics while you were in school. You have a Bachelor of Arts, Economics and Management from Oxford. And you had your PhD from Wharton in Financial Economics. So does this have something to do with the book, the latest book?
Well, it need not do, because you could get a PhD in economics without focusing on social value. So responsible business is only one area of economics. You could get a PhD by doing thesis on how to make money in the stock market. So instead, I chose to focus my research on how to make sure that companies create long-term value for society. So why did I indeed write the book, and what is pie economics about? It's about the idea that responsibility and serving society is not just an optional extra. It's not something which is nice to have. It's something that is fundamental to a company's long-term success. So let me explain what I mean by the pie. So I view the value that a company creates as being given by a pie, and that pie can either be sliced to investors in the form of profits, or society in the form of wages to workers or taxes to the government and so on. And often business leaders think that the best way to increase profits is to split the pie differently. We can take from society by charging massive prices, by underpaying our workers, and by cheating on tax. But instead, what I wanted to highlight was the approach of growing the pie, that the better way to create profits is to serve society, is to invest in stakeholders so that employees are more motivated and more productive, so that you're producing products that genuinely satisfy customer needs, and so forth. And then profits are a byproduct of serving society.
Great. So your pie economics ingredients or actually parts. It's the investors, the society, the stakeholders, which is employees and customer. What's the ingredients of the pie? Why would people like this pie?
Well, the pie is, so it's important to say the pie is not financial profit. So some people hear the idea of grow the pie and think it's about growing wealth, when it's not. Like, the pie is social value. So it's the value that a company creates for society that includes the wealth for its investors, but it also includes meaningful human capital development of its employees. It also includes providing products and services that genuinely transform customers' lives for the better, even if they're for free. So I just gave a talk at Talks at Google, and Google does a lot of stuff which is for free, like Google Maps and Google Search. All of these things transform our lives, and yet we don't pay for them at all. And so why do we want to create the pie, right? We want to do this to serve society, but also what the evidence is suggesting is this bounces back and makes a company more profitable as a result.
Mm-hmm. Great. Do you know a company or a business owner that has tasted the pie, and what she or he felt about it?
Yeah, so I think there are several. So one example I like to give is Vodafone. So in 2007, Vodafone, that was a time where they were normally focused on winning spectrum license auctions and increasing their market share in the West. But instead they said, no, let us try to serve wider society and use our expertise in communications to serve a social problem. And that problem was that in Kenya, many people did not have access to banks. So what they invented was M-Pesa, a mobile money service in Kenya, which allowed people to transfer money on mobile phones. And so that was much, much easier than just having to go to banks. And so that was one where they did this in order to serve society, but ultimately Vodafone was able to profit from that. And so while an action was done to solve a social problem, ultimately shareholders also benefited. So it was one which was good for society first and foremost, but ultimately was also good for investors.
Mm-hmm. Great. While I was doing the research for the economic pies, I read a very interesting article for you in 2017. It was in a website called CTAM. I just will quote just two sentences. Thus, our reforms aim at growing the pie for the benefit of all stakeholders, rather than changing how a fixed pie is divided. So it seems from 2017, you had this idea of growing the pie, but you only released the book in 2020. So it seems there was a journey from 2017 so far, and these two lines that I mentioned, it was relating to your work in the Purposeful company. So can you please give us shed light on that?
Thanks, Ahmed, and I really appreciate you highlighting that. And I think it's very important whenever you write about something to make sure it's really rigorous and based on a lot of evidence and tried and tested practices. Because the problem is that purpose is now a very popular topic, and lots of people want to write about it to become famous. And what you do see is there are some talks, some books, or some documents out there which say stuff which sort of sounds good, but it's not actually based on evidence. But if it's something which confirms what people would like to be true, then people will believe it. So they might say heavily regulate companies or give companies to workers, and that sort of sounds nice, and so that's why people with that position get a lot of support. But I wanted to be really careful and make sure that whenever, before writing any book, I first did a lot of evidence gathering. So I'd done a lot of academic research in Wharton until I moved to London Business School in 2013. And then after that, I decided to do a lot of policy work with the Purposeful company, thinking about, well, how to apply those academic ideas to practice. Because often academic ideas are not really implementable. So I did that. And then it was only when it got to 2018 that I decided to write the book. And why did I write the book? Because I thought, yes, with the Purposeful company, we are influencing people, but we're only really influencing executives and policymakers, sort of people running organizations, not people, everywhere in a company, where maybe a middle manager needs to hear the message of purpose. So the way of writing the purpose of writing the book was to make this idea of responsible business much more mainstream, rather than just see the CEOs and the top investors that we were interacting with in the purposeful company.
Mm-hmm. The company owners, what can be convincing to them to accept the pie economics?
Well, I think two things are convincing. So I think the first thing is evidence, right? So often people think, no, a company here is to make money, and then we only care about purpose or social responsibility in order to avoid getting in trouble. So it might be that you give some money to charity, or you put a black square when Mr. Floyd was killed in order to try to sort of be seen to be doing good. But what I wanted to show is no, purpose is not just something which is insulating in risk management. It's something that you should practically want to do, because when a company is purposeful, then workers are more motivated and more productive. Then indeed you are able to make some investments because you are thinking about, well, how can my actions serve society? So I wanted to show there's a business case for that. Interestingly, I'm a professor of finance. So often people who think about purpose are in organizational behavioral strategy departments. Often finance people think this is a load of rubbish. I wanted to show that as a hard-hearted finance person, that no, I think the idea of purpose is something which is truly meaningful. I think the second thing to highlight is that a company must also recognize that purpose doesn't mean being all things to all people. Right, it means being focused and targeted. So some companies don't want to think about purpose. They think, well, this means I have to think about climate change and diversity and automation and skills development and globalization and resource depletion. But actually what I really stress in my book is that purpose is being really focused and targeted on the specific social problems that your company is best placed to solve. And so what I want to highlight is that purpose needs doesn't mean you need to be all things to all people and swing in the wind, but just to focus on what are the specific problems that your company has the resources and expertise to address.
So now you are trying to say that purpose can be related to the social problems.
Yes.
Okay, great. I have a confession to you. Throughout my formal education, it is like maybe 18 years, whatever, 6 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, whatever, the number of years. I have never passed across the word purpose in any management book or in any science book or in any biology book or in any language book, you know. So it seems that in our culture or our education system, we are not used to purpose. We don't know what is it. We don't know how to practice it. We don't know how to bring it into our life, our business, our business practices, our company policies, our whatever laws, even the company laws, even the big institutional, the marketplace laws. So how can we get this idea of purpose, which we are not accustomed to, into our system of life?
Yeah, so this is another reason for writing the book is to make this idea of purpose accessible to everybody, not just the people in the C-suite, such as CEOs. You're right, many books don't focus on purpose, and the ones that do think of it in a very sort of loose and fluffy way. So I wanted to make purpose concrete, and in particular highlight that purpose doesn't mean being all things to all people, but it means being focused and targeted, asking yourself, well, purpose involves doing less of some things in order to do more of other things. So I wanted to put some principles down for why people can actually start to practice purpose in their actual life. And it's not just the book that I've released, Grow the Pie, but like there's a very well-known textbook in finance. You might know it's called Principles of Corporate Finance by Brealey, Myers and Allen. This is the big standard MBA textbook that almost all business students use. When I was at Morgan Stanley, it was given to all analysts when it joined. I've now become a co-author of that book. book. And so the next edition of the book, which is out in a couple of years, there will be a discussion of the importance of purpose. So you're right, it's something that people had forgotten about for a long time. Now it's become at the forefront. But the danger is that you're having a lot of people now who start writing about purpose without having thought about it in the past. But I've been working on this for 15 years. And so that's why what I want to write about is based on evidence rather than just shooting from the hip or wishful thinking.
Mm-hmm. So were you able during the past 15 years to incorporate purpose in your formal working in London Business School?
Yeah, I would say it is, because like if you think about what is the purpose of a professor, so I would define my purpose as the creation and dissemination of knowledge. Now, what that means is I want to create new knowledge and disseminate it widely to people. Now, that is actually quite different to what is rewarded as a professor. So if you're a professor, your job is only to focus on research. How you get tenure and how you get promotion is purely on academic research. Your teaching does not help at all. No one cares about your teaching when they choose to promote you. But I thought, no, teaching is part of my purpose to create and disseminate knowledge. So I chose to, from day one at Wharton, actually before that, when I was a PhD student at MIT and I had to do some teaching, to really focus on my teaching and try to become an excellent teacher. Why? Because it was part of the dissemination of knowledge. And while that's something which I don't think has helped me in terms of getting more publications or more academic awards, it's something that I have just loved doing. And so it gives me a lot of personal satisfaction. And then when it means that when I do my research, I'm just a happier person because I've done the teaching that I've done. And similarly, like for this podcast, right, I'm not being paid to do it, but I just love having these conversations. I love the fact that I know that hopefully people will listen to it and think about the importance of purpose. And so that's why I view this as an absolute pleasure to do.
Great. Me as well. I'm very happy to discuss about purpose with you and all our valued guests. And but is it possible to include purpose into the subject that you teach to students?
Yes, it is, and indeed. This May and June, I launched with a colleague a new elective called Managing and Investing in Responsible Business at London Business School. So this ran for 10 sessions, and it was based on the book Grow the Pie. But we also had some great guest speakers in, and these guest speakers were leaders of businesses, some from companies and some from investors, talking about how they themselves put purpose into practice. And so I think it is possible to teach it. So that's why I launched this as being an elective. And also, even in my core finance class, to the extent possible, I try to teach the importance of purpose to people.
Great. Now, you just mentioned that you have met a lot of business people and executives who try to put purpose into the business life. So, can you share with us one or two stories about how did they manage to do this?
Yeah, so I think it's to have a very clear set of targets as to what purpose actually means. Because without that, then purpose is nebulous and it's vague. So one example is Unilever. So I know pretty well Sue Garrard, who was the executive vice president of Unilever, who ran and launched their sustainable living plan. I actually have my own podcast where I interviewed Sue Garrard. So if people Google this, it's the London Business School podcast where I interview her. And she talked about, well, when she set up the sustainable living plan, they needed to define, well, what does it mean to be sustainable? They're going to have particular targets. Some of those targets might be to reduce the calories of their ice cream. Some of their targets might be to move towards 100% sustainable palm oil and so forth. But they had these targets. So they said, this is what it specifically means for Unilever to be purposeful, and so that they give them guidance according to their journey. But also the environmental impact in terms of producing their products. So not using unsustainable palm oil. So it's not, so the product is just the end item, but I think it's the process as well through which the product is made. And also part of it might also involve how well you treat your workers. So I know there's companies with goals for diversity, for youth employment, for internal promotion, to make sure that there are great career opportunities for growth, in contrast to other companies where they will hire people from the outside as part of their strategy.
Yes, great. Now, as well, when you are saying social values and society and all of this, some people, they are raised and brought up, a lot of people, where society is not part of their worldview. They just think of anything of what is in it for me. Mostly people are like have short sight and only not a wide view. So this kind of view, it's there in business. So how did you find someone in business that who had previously this kind of narrow view and now he has a kind of wider view that he can include society in the business formula?
Yeah, so you think of just how companies have changed in terms of how carefully they're thinking about purpose. So one sector is like the investment banking industry, which I have first-hand knowledge of, is that I used to be an investment banker at Morgan Stanley. And back then it was the view that analysts, which is the most junior level of banker, they basically should be working all the time, right? So their time is freely disposable. You don't need to think about their work-life balance or their mental health. But I think now people recognize that they need to think about the health and well-being of their employees, that now weekend work is the exception rather than the rule. And so while the industry is still obviously hard work, I think people are being treated much better than they were in the past. Another company which is treating its workers better is Walmart. So Walmart used to famously pay its workers significantly less than Costco. And then I won't just claim it's because of my research, but many others as well. But my research shows that actually companies that treat their workers well do better in the long term. And the example I used, and you might have seen this in my TEDx talk, was Costco. Costco was paying double the wages of Walmart, and despite that they were doing really well financially, and Walmart voluntarily chose to give large wage increases way above the minimum wage. So they are recognizing that actually the way to treat their employees is not by squeezing them as much as possible. So I do think there has been a change. I wouldn't say it was an epiphany. I still think there's a way to go, but I think companies are now taking purpose much more seriously than they were doing in the past. And this is why my approach to this has been an evidence-based approach to say, there is a business case for purpose. You don't just do it because it's a way to improve public image and a way to avoid bad headlines in the newspaper. But if you treat your workers well, they're going to be more likely to stay, they're going to be more productive, they're going to be more efficient.
Great. And through your research and through your business meeting with other professionals, now you mentioned that Costco is paying double than Walmart. So let's say for Costco, do you have like an insider information to reach this decision to pay double like a competitor? How did they reach this decision? How long does it take to take the decision? Is it an easy process? Is it something that took years? Have you any kind of insights about that?
Yeah, so why they did that? Well, it was just how their view as to the importance of their employees. So the Costco CFO Richard Galanti, he said the following: from day one, we've run the business with the philosophy that if we provide people with a healthy environment, a salary that they can live on, we'll be able to hire better people, they'll stay longer, and they'll be more efficient. So that was just their philosophy, was that, yeah, we think actually the pie can be grown, is that if we pay our workers more, it's not just splitting the pie and reducing profits, it's something that is going to pay back and feed back to us in terms of better profits, because our workers are going to just be more productive and more efficient. So they always had that philosophy. They had that philosophy even before I did my study. But I think where the research now helps is for people who historically thought that it was just a waste of money, are now realizing, no, there was actually something behind this in terms of treating our workers better.
Now, do you see the growth of purpose in corporate? Is it like how many percentage you find that there are really corporate that is really endorsing or really practicing purpose the way you see it? Is it a big percentage or is it a lower percentage?
Yeah, I often get asked that question, but I think it's a very difficult question to answer, because there's no bright line saying, well, once you overcome this line, you count as endorsing it, and if you're below the line, that you count as not endorsing. It's just to say, well, how many CEOs are good or bad, right? That it depends on what your criterion is for being a good CEO. So I think that's just a hard question, and it's not really a meaningful question because it depends on how you're defining purposeful enough. Instead, what I'll say is that there is a certain, definitely marked trend towards companies thinking much more seriously about purpose than they used to. Now, could it be more? Absolutely, but just the conversations I have is with a lot of these mainstream people. So these are with leading investors and CEOs of companies and board members. It's not just corporate social responsibility departments. It's become mainstream. And also, if I think about my students, right, when I started as a professor at Wharton in 2007, the most common industry people wanted to go into was private equity, and now it's not that. So people do generally want purposeful careers. It might be, yes, you want to go into investing, but investing needs to have a responsible lens to it. Even in private equity, now they are thinking about purpose being very fundamental. So I have given the talk on the importance of purpose to private equity firms at their annual general meeting in front of their main investors. Now, maybe 15 years ago, if I'd done that, people would have just laughed me out of the room thinking, why is this guy talking about purpose? It's a load of rubbish. But I think now people are thinking this is something which is financially material.
Great. And for the people who are still finding it hard to figure out that purpose is something good or important or have a long-term benefit, as you mentioned, have you discussed with them what's their bottlenecks or what is their roadblocks that's keeping them from recognizing or figuring out this side that you have?
Yeah, thanks. That's a really important question. So why is it that people are still not being purposeful? I think it is that while purpose does pay off, it only pays off in the long term. Right. So while I talk about growing the pie grows, but only in the long term. So if you invest in your workers, yes, they become more productive and efficient, but there is quite a long time lag for that. And the reality is that many CEOs are driven by short-term profit. Why? Because that's what their incentive contract says. They are going to be paid a bonus if they hit a particular short-term number. If a company misses its quarterly earnings target, then the stock price goes down the floor. And so because there are a lot of these short-term pressures, that's what leads to companies ignoring purpose. And so what is the solution to that? Well, I think it needs to be that investors themselves take a much more long-term view. But some investors don't do that. Why? Because some investors have such small stakes in a company that they won't look beyond short-term earnings because they don't have the large stakes enough to make it worth their while to try to truly analyze a company. So I think one big starting point is we need to start with investors, is once investors start to be more concentrated and take larger stakes in companies, then they will understand these companies much more deeply. They're going to look beyond the numbers and understand these non-financial metrics. And then the company then can focus a bit more on these non-financial metrics as well.
So how can investors increase their knowledge about what you just mentioned now? How can London Business School help them in this? How can whatever communities can help investors in that? How could this be possible?
So I think it's to look at the evidence as to what are the relevant dimensions to look for. So there are some investors, for example, who look at the pay ratio, the ratio of CEO pay to worker pay, and they say, well, that's a dimension of how purposeful a company is. But that doesn't make sense. That the evidence actually shows that that's a really bad measure of pay fairness. So one of the reasons for writing the book is to make the evidence clear as to what actually is the relevant dimensions of purpose. So for pay, it's not so much the pay ratio or the pay level, it's the pay horizon. And so there has been a lot of misinformation about purpose, as I mentioned, because purpose is a hot topic. Now, a lot of people are writing about purpose without having done research. And so they're saying, well, let's look at things such as the pay ratio, but it's not backed up by evidence. So what I think is really important is for investors to look at the evidence. And the role of a business school is, because a business school is based on research, to look at the research as to what does the evidence show.
You mentioned now a new expression, pay horizon. Can you give us a little more explanation about it?
Yeah, so pay horizon is whether pay is tied to the short term or the long term. So if CEOs are given shares, are they allowed to sell their shares within 3 years, or must they hold them for 7 years? And I think the latter is what's going to lead to them making much more long-term decisions.
And is there something strong that's stopping investor from changing to the longer pay horizon?
Yeah, so it's just a misunderstanding of the evidence. So there's many people who think that the pay ratio is what matters. So I was testifying in the UK Parliament where there was an inquiry, and the witness before me quoted evidence claiming that companies with lower pay ratios perform better in the long term. But what they quoted was actually wrong evidence. They quoted a half-finished version of a study. Now, the finished version was out and had found the opposite results, and yet they chose to quote the half-finished study because it supported what they wanted to hear. So again, it's really important to be critical and discerning about the evidence and look at the most rigorous, highest quality evidence.
In your website, you mentioned one sentence which I really liked. In the first page, in your homepage, you mentioned that we need reforms to embed purpose into the heart of business. Then suddenly I stopped. Heart. Now we're talking about something different, not research, not evidence, we're talking about heart now. We're talking about the people. So purpose and heart and business. How can this be integrated?
Yeah, well, I think this is why purpose is so powerful. Is why is purpose something that can lead to a company being so successful? Is it changes the hearts of people. Now, previously, managers didn't think about the heart of people. They thought about the bodies of people. So if you were Henry Ford, who ran the assembly line back in the 1920s, all he viewed was that workers did is they turned cogs on the assembly line, or they did certain things on a production process. And so he didn't care about their heart, and the way in which to motivate them was to say, you do this, you follow these instructions. And that was possible because back then they performed very routine and repetitive tasks. Nowadays, what we want from workers is innovation. It's a lot of intangible things that they're doing. And so what we knew is we need to win their hearts and make them committed to a company's mission. So a company which has a mission of serving wider society, that's one where the employees are going to be far more productive. So we need to win their hearts rather than just winning their bodies, because with their bodies, right, you can control it by saying you do this, but then you can do that for that's treating people like donkeys and animals, not like people who have hearts and minds.
So how hearts can be incorporated into education system?
I think it's to show people that just the importance of intrinsic motivation, right? Because historically, people thought about motivation as you pay people for output, but we want to show, no, there's actually a better way to motivate people, which is to use intrinsic motivation and the value of purpose. And so that is where I think a lot of the shift needs to be made.
So then the definition of success has to change to include other things than materialistic things.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I think profit is still important, but profit is a byproduct of serving wider society. So companies do need to serve wider society, and then you would have as your measure of success, right, whatever your mission has to be. So if it is you're a pharmaceuticals company, it's not your profits, but the number that you help. For example, Merck has a program where it gives a drug called Mectizan, which cures river blindness, and so it says, well, we treat 300 million people per year, and so that's a measure of their success, is the number of people that they're potentially curing from river blindness.
And there is one view that I heard, that some people don't like to hear the word society because they believe in something called sense of entitlement. So I'm entitled for the wealth I have. So, and you are not entitled to share this wealth with me, or to share the power with me, or to share this thing. So this kind of understanding or mentality, the sense of entitlement, have you met before?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So there are people who think, no, we should think about individuals, not about wider society, because like if I've earned the money, right, then I should keep it. I shouldn't give it to other people in the form of taxes. But I think that is partially misguided, because there are a lot of social goods that we need to pay for. For example, if the people around me are, let's say to extreme, homeless, right, because the government doesn't care about providing housing, then I don't want to. I'm not happy living in a city where there's a lot of homeless people around, because I care about people, how they live. So I'd be happy. I'm happy paying taxes to make sure that people are not homeless. And similarly, something like diseases, right? So if people don't have good healthcare treatment because of no national health service and they get ill, they can then be spread the disease, and then it can hurt me. So the society is not just out there and I'm separate from society. Society affects me. I'm affected emotionally by seeing people who are homeless on the street. Even if I'm a selfish person, I only care about my own health, I am affected if indeed there are other people who are sick, if it's a contagious disease, because there's no health service. So I don't think you can think about society as being disembodied from you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great view, and I agree with that. I hope as well a lot of investors, they have kind of understanding and feeling like you are saying. Thank you, Alex, for your time. I really appreciate your insights. So thank you very much for joining.
Thanks so much, Ahmed. It was great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Dear listeners, in the next episode of the Values and Leadership podcast, we will share the secrets of success from another successful leader in business. Tune in to learn more about participative leadership and purposeful impacts in business.